Chevre, how are you? I hope everyone is gesund, stark und freilich, begashmis und beruchnis. I hope everyone is healthy, strong, and happy physically and spiritually. Today is Erev Shabbos Kodesh Parshas Vayikra. We're starting a new Chumash, and this week in Mirz Hashem, Tuesday night is Yud Aleph Nisan, the birthday of the Rebbe, turning 123 years old. We start a new kapitel Tilim as the custom of Chassidim, that we start a new kapitel. We learn the Rebbe's kapitel, that's the custom, and we say it every single day. It's also Thursday night is going to be Yud Gimel Nisan, which is the Yomei Lula of the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Lubavitcher Rebbe. As usual, since the war started, we start with charity, tzedakah, gdela, tzedakah, shemakarev, sagula. Mashiach should come now. All the houses should return home safely, etc. The new kapitel is Kuf Chav Daled. There's one pasuk there that inspires me greatly. I don't know if I'm going to elaborate totally on it right now or at length, but just the pasuk, it speaks about, this kapitel speaks about Jewish survival. And Lule Hashem Shahaya Lanu, the Eibishter always gives us the strength. Ezreinu b'shem Hashem oiseh shemayim v'aretz. With Hashem's help, we always are rescued and saved. So really, we're speaking about the immortality of the Jew and the ultimate empowerment. Whatever the adversary, whatever the challenge, we rise above it. So there's one pasuk here which says, Nafsheinu k'tzipor nimlata mipach yogshim hapach nishbar v'anachnu nimlotnu. I find this so inspiring. Our soul escaped as a bird out of the fowler's snare. The snare is broken and we escaped. So the commentators just bring out the point that the bird is very fragile. The bird is a delicate animal, creature. And even though the bird is so frail and so vulnerable compared to the rest of the animal kingdom, it could easily be killed. Nevertheless, Hashem saves us. But to me, I believe we have to emphasize Nafsheinu Ketzipor. With Hashem's help, not only we escape Hapach Nishbar, and the enemy gets crushed and broken and decimated, but we end up flying. Fly, baby, fly. A Jew has the power to fly because we're different. We're different than all of creation. Nafsheinu, because of our nefesh, the nefesh elikis, the chelik elikam mimal mamish, nafsheinu, the Jewish soul is ketzipa like a bird. So even though it could be seen to be that it seems like there's a trap, we always have the ability, as the saying goes, because we have a special connection above, we don't fall down below. So this is something which during the year probably we'll speak about it more often. So in this week's parsha, there's an issue. We speak about kabbonis, but there's a mitzvah in this parsha which really touches upon something which is very relevant to every single one of us and shows us also the beauty of Judaism and Yiddishkeit. And that's in a concept which we spoke of many times. And in today's world, it is so sorely lacking. And that is leadership. And the relationship between the leader and his followers, etc. How do we learn it from this week's parsha? It speaks about korbanos. There is a korban that's a korban chatas, which is meant to bring for a sin. And first, the parsha talks about korbanos, the ones that were nedavas, that were brought out of just a nedava, a contribution. But then it speaks about what happens if the high priest did something wrong. And then it says there's a mitzvah called a mitzvah connected to a communal mistake. And why was there a communal mistake? Because the Bezdin, Sanhedrin, made a mistake and we followed their instructions. And then afterwards it speaks about a nasi, when a prince, a king, does something wrong. So we're going to focus on the mitzvah primarily of where it speaks about that what happens if the whole community did something wrong and pasuk says, I don't know what's going on over here. I turned to the wrong page. The pasuk says over here in Kapitel Dalid, pasuk Yud Dalid, and the pasuk says that the pasuk says, pasuk Yud Gimel, the im kol adas Yisrael yishgu the ne'elam dover me'einei hakol. If the entire assembly of Israel shall err, and a matter became obscured from the eyes of the congregation. And Rashi says, v'ne'elam dover became obscured, l'hoiros, l'hoiros, because Bezdin Sanhedrin gave a ruling which was a wrong ruling, a mistake ruling. So now, in the Gemara, it speaks about, it's a machlokes. So when the congregation makes a misruling, and the congregation listens to the rulings of the court, of the Bezdin, so then this korban has to be brought. It's one of the 613 commandments. It's called Mitzvahs Korban Bezdin Im Tov Bahira. It's the mitzvah of bringing a sacrifice if they made a mistake, and it's called Helem Dover, Par Helem Dover Shel Tzibur. You bring this par, this bull, when something was concealed from the congregation, from the majority, from the masses. The masses did something wrong. So over here there's an argument. What is the idea of the korban? Is it more that the community has to bring the korban because they did something wrong? And therefore it's a sign, even though you got to ask, why should they have to bring a korban? What did they do wrong? They followed orders. You're meant to listen to the Rabbanim, no matter what. There's another pasuk that says that, and we'll learn that out. That you must follow the rulings of court, of the judges. That's also a mitzvah. So what did they do wrong? So the answer to that is, especially based on Chassidus, that means it shows that whatever they did wrong has a connection to them, and it shows, Hashem orchestrates in such a way that it shows that there's something that's lacking, there's something that's missing, there's a flaw, and Hashem brings it to our attention by allowing such a thing to happen, and then we all decide that we have to better ourselves. We'll soon talk about that a bit differently, but the same point. So some commentators say that it's primarily about the congregation, about the people. Some commentators, the Gemara, it's a machlokes, others say no. The congregation brings the korban because everyone in the end misstepped, did something wrong. But it's meant to be for the Rabbanim, also for the Sanhedrin. In other words, part of the idea of the mitzvah is to bring out the point that no one's perfect. Even the Sanhedrin could sometimes do something wrong. And it brings out the point that leaders have to be especially stringent to themselves, to think double, triple careful, that if they do something, they cause damage in a massive way, in a huge way, in a large scale. So that's also the lesson from this mitzvah, that leaders have to be especially careful, because they have to realize they could be either from the people that bring many to do the right thing or the wrong thing. But before we get into this idea, I think we could say a general point, which is a very important point in Avodas Hashem. I'm going to paraphrase what the Alter Rebbe says in chapter 29 as a message in life in general. And I'm talking from experience that I speak to many people going through hardships. And there's always different hardships, whether it's a COVID, whether it's the fires in San Francisco, etc., etc. It doesn't stop. People go through different challenges. And I deal with many people, students, etc. So the point is that there's the one thing we have to remember in every single situation is that there's only one real answer. And what is that? Everything and everything is to make you stronger. That is the only reason. Now, what exactly is Hashem's plan and how He worked it out that it should be in such a way, that we'll find out when Mashiach comes. But what you have to know, bottom line is, that in every situation you have to look inside yourself and see how you can become better from it. You can learn from it. Now, the Alter Rebbe in chapter 29 talks about Timtum Halev, which means the person is paralyzed spiritually. He feels nothing. He feels numb. He feels that nothing's moving him. He can't get motivated. He can't get stimulated. It's a very problematic situation. And the Alter Rebbe's solution is a very radical, drastic prescription called bitush, crushing. I'm not going to elaborate, see there. But what I want to focus on is two lines where the Alter Rebbe really gets to what's behind it all. And the Alter Rebbe says, my favorite doctor, that when you reach such a situation and you're asking why, I'm interested, I want to do the right thing, I'm a seeker, why is this happening to me? So the Alter Rebbe says two things, even though they're different, but the bottom line is the same. He says, at this point in time, when you see that there's nothing arousing you, you can't get ignited, you can't get excited. So you have to realize, stop. So one reason is, because even though you're going in the right direction and you're a good person, but there's something from a long time ago, some imperfection, some insubordination, call it whatever you want, is now resurfacing. Until now, it wasn't a problem because you fixed it up. But now that we want you to reach the next level, let's say a person who is in intelligence or in the army, he could be a sergeant, he could be a major, he could be a colonel, he could be a general, he could be a chief of staff, he could then become the prime minister, call it whatever you want. But for each level, there has to be a new level, a new degree of security clearance. For this level to be a sergeant, no problem, that's enough. But to be a colonel, that's a whole different assessment. That's the first thing the Alter Rebbe says. That means this person, it could be that whatever he did was good for yesterday, but today, we're looking at it, we want you to advance, we want you to have a promotion. In order to get the promotion, you need to go through a deeper spiritual arousal, a more profound level of service. That's one idea. And then, oy shareitzim la'loisoi, which means glat. Hashem wants to elevate you. He wants you to rise. L'tshuva lo yoseh mumkedli b'yoseh, which means a tshuva not on sin, but just a deeper bond, a deeper cleaving, a deeper dveikus, a deeper attachment with Hashem. So therefore, He wants you to go through this affliction, this experience of being paralyzed, so to speak, and then you're going to dig deeper in yourself, and therefore it's going to make you stronger. So in other words, either you need to become stronger now because what you did for the past wasn't enough, and right now there's something blocking for you to be able to go further because you did something bad in the past. I don't want to elaborate on this right now. Or even if you did nothing in the past, nevertheless, Hashem wants you to become higher. He wants you to become elevated. He wants you to become superior spiritually. And the only way to become elevated is to go through this experience, which is going to be havoc, which is going to be, for lack of a better word, traumatic. Don't take it literally. But it means an extreme experience. An extreme experience. You know, like in life, by the way, usually people speak about change, and they say, when does a person change? Usually it's either in the best of times, when something great, unbelievable happens to him, and he says, you know, wow, Hashem delivered me, the greatest joy. Or when somebody's in the worst situation, he's in prison, or he goes through a life-threatening illness, and he decides he has to change. His whole priorities become shifted. So, Amen, Hashem should make it all that we should all change, because we're being showered by so much kindness and goodness that it causes us to change. My point is, from the Alter Rebbe that he says over here, tziyazoi, whether it's this way or that way, the net result is that there's only one purpose, and the purpose is growth, advancement, development, etc. So the same thing we could say about this mitzvah of para helem davar shel tzibur. The best way to look at it, because that's ultimately what it's going to be according to Chassidus. Whether we say, we can take it 3 steps, whether we say it in the lowest level, it shows that it has a connection to us. That's not the lowest. The lowest really means if you actually did something wrong in the past. Second level is maybe you didn't do anything in the past, but the mere fact that this happened, something that caused the whole community to err in a massive way, in a large scale, proves that this idea of doing something wrong is connected to everyone, and therefore they have to now be more careful with themselves, be on guard, not to let something happen worse. Or, if you want to learn, like, let's say, concerning the Sanhedrin in a certain way, the Alter Rebbe is like the thing, glatt. Hashem is doing this and made this happen so that everyone should dig deeper and come to a higher level, next level service and Avodas Hashem. And this is a message to every single one of us of relevance. As I said before, people are always questioning why, what's going on, etc. And obviously, giving everyone a bracha right now, it's the month of Nisan, everyone should go through miracles. But one thing you have to drill into your head again and again, Hashem has a plan. We don't know what the plan is. We'll find out exactly later when Mashiach comes, all the moves, what came before, all of the past, and how it was connected to the present, and how it affected the future that was coming, etc. But nevertheless, this truth, this truism that we're stating right now, which is, this is for sure, bottom line, what you have to know is that the reason behind it, and the same thing in this week's parasha, the reason behind why we have this mitzvah, that even when we did the right thing and the Sanhedrin made a mistake in their judgment, it was all that we should take a next level microscope to look deep inside ourselves and find out how if good is better, not better, we can always become better. And that's really the better life, the happier life. Yismach leiv mevakshe Hashem. One of the beauties of Yiddishkeit is, just when there was a situation where you might have been complacent and rested on your laurels, Hashem does something to you, and sometimes it's so disappointing to a certain extent, you feel disappointment, but the way you have to look at it, really, He wants you to feel that scare, that shock, just for a moment, but to reinforce yourself, to say, no, I have to become even stronger. And by the way, there's a Moedik Medrash. Oi, I lost it over here. There's a Moedik Medrash from Medrash Rabbah, where it says over here, but he gave this carbon, the heavy esapor el oil of Pesach oil moed, that this part that they were bringing, you have to bring it to the opening of the oil moed. Listen to this. Omar Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak said, why is it brought, this carbon, this par, is brought to the opening of the oil moed, even though later it has to be taken away from there, obviously, to shechter, etc. But listen to this. Listen to this. Omar Rabbi Yitzchak Moshel Oyav Shel Melech Shekabdoi B'Deiron U'B'Kilusin. Imagine someone's a friend of the king and wants to honor the king with a beautiful gift and fine praise. And he brought that gift to the king. Omar HaMelech Hinicha Yosei Al Pesach Polotin. Put it at the opening of the palace. Kol Sheyetze V'Nichnes Yehiroya Yosei. Whoever comes should look at this beautiful gift and they'll say, wow, this is what the king loves. Look at this special person. He was able to understand exactly what brings joy and pleasure to the king. Kach vehevius aparel pesach el moed. So too over here, when the Eibishter says, bring this pearl to the Pesach el moed, because the beauty, the greatest beauty in general, is somebody who, let's say, is a rebel, or somebody who has difficulties and challenges, and he rises above them. And the greater the situation, and nevertheless we were able to get out of it, the greater the joy by the king. This carbon, which in a way you could say is the most severe, and we're not going to be able to get into all this, the sikha that I was going to say, but just concerning this carbon, where it speaks about how the kohen who brings it has to sprinkle the blood 7 times before Hashem, Pnei HaPareches, toward the curtain. And Rashi says, but before that, when it spoke about what the kohen did something wrong, he goes through the same thing, he has to do that service, and it says Pnei Pareches HaKodesh, and it calls it the holy curtain. And over here, Rashi says, in verse 17, Moshe l'melech shesarcha l'medina, a king that the entire country rebelled, and he says, if it's only a part of the country that rebelled, so he still has his institution and it's still strong. But when the entire congregation rebelled, then the kedusha of the mikdash is affected. It's like it's not there anymore. He finishes off, Av kan kashachot kohen Mashiach, adayin shem kedushas hamakim ala mikdash. Mishachot kulam chad v'sholem, nistalka hagdusha. When the anointed kohen sinned, which is something the Pasuk just mentioned before, so the status of holiness of the location still remains upon the Beis HaMikdash. And therefore it said, Pnei HaPareches, that was HaKodesh. But Mishachatu Kulam, once all of Israel has sinned, in this case, Chas v'Sholom, heaven forbid, Nistalka Kedusha, the holiness has departed. And now comes the Chidush, that even in such a sin, and maybe you could say because of it, because of the gravity and the seriousness of the situation, and still they bring a carbon. The accomplishment of the carbon is that the Eibishter says this was the greatest gift. That's what the Medrash is saying. It's the most amazing gift. And we see from life, I know as a teacher, when you have students that are, as they come into the class or the beginning of the year, they're just no problem. They're easy. So it's beautiful and it causes a lot of nachas. No question about it. But the real nachas, whoever's the teacher knows, is that student who struggled and he came into the year one way, having difficulties in many, many areas, and maybe even in the basics, and he brought out from you more work, more attention, more involvement that had to be on the teacher's part. But at the end of the year, when you see what you accomplished with this student, wow, it gives you such nachas, and you're proud, you host nachas from the Talmud. And this is you look at it and you say, wow, look at this person. It reaffirms your faith in mankind, etc., etc. The Eibishter, when there was a problem that the Sanhedrin is able to say we made a mistake, and they said we made a misruling. In other words, the truth. Open up to the truth. Don't be scared to admit that you made a mistake. And not only that, it was such a terrible mistake that it brought the whole congregation to do the thing which is wrong also. So it's more severe even than the mistake of the Kohen HaMashiach, which you could argue the Kohen HaMashiach was his own fault when he sinned. B'shoigi. But in this case, the sin is something which is much greater, much less you could argue, because it's not even their fault at all. They listened to what the Rabbanim said. But nevertheless, because it involved such a large scale of Eden, the Kedusha of the Mikdash departed, and that wasn't the case of the Kohen Gadol. And nevertheless, even though it was such a grave situation, a life-threatening spiritual, let's say, situation that caused the Shekhinah to depart, the Kedusha, call it, of the Mikdash to depart, nevertheless, when we did the Tshuva, that's the gift that we bring to the Eibishter with the carbon, obviously, was an internal change. We succeeded. We took this challenge. We went through this problem. We dug deeper. And we became stronger. and we offered that gift up to Hashem. So then Hashem takes pride in that. He hangs it up, puts it on display at the front entrance so that everyone should see exactly, wow, this is the greatest gift. The greatest gift is the transformation of man, that he works on himself to elevate himself for Hashem, etc. Okay, it's really, really late. I didn't speak about maybe not even half of what I wanted to say. So afterwards, there comes another Rashi, where Rashi says, where he speaks about this carbon, and he says, what do we offer up? Pasuk Yutes, 2 psukim later, it says that Veskol Chel Bayarim, that you separate all its fats and you elevate, you bring that to Hashem, and it has to be placed on the Mizbeach. But Rashi says, Afal Pishle Pirish Kan, it doesn't say clearly, Yeseres Shtei Kloyes, the diaphragm, the 2 kidneys, but they also have to be placed on the Mizbeach. We learn it out from the next pasuk. But Rashi doesn't just say that the reason is because we're going to learn it out from the next pasuk. As we'll see there, see Rashi, I'm not going to elaborate now, I just want to bring out a point. But he says over here, the reason why the pasuk doesn't mention it is he brings another analogy. And I want to tell you, the same person gave this analogy in Gemara in Zvachim, Daf 41b. And this was Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel said, Tana debei Rabbi Shmuel, Mashal the Melech Shazam al Oyevei. This can be compared to a king who became incensed at his loving friend. Umiyat b'sirchaynai, the king was brief in his discussions of the friend's dishonor. And nechi basei, because of the friend's love, because of his love for his friend. So as long sich and Chiluk of Zion, I truly suggest you look there, where the Rebbe explains why do we have to bring the analogy, the previous one and this one. Why this time he says Rabbi Shmuel, why that time he doesn't bring Rabbi Shmuel. So the point is that the reason why over here in Pasuk Yutes, the Rashi has to bring it is because once we already bring out the fact that the status of the Mikdash was changed, the severity of what was caused through what the Yidden did wrong, so to speak, that they made this mistake, then becomes the question, so why wouldn't the Torah state clearly how bad the carbon is, how bad, in other words, the Yidden have to rectify it, that they have to also put the diaphragm in the 2 kidneys. That brings out how much more you have to sacrifice, so to speak. So the question is, because we learned in Perek Yud Zayin the degree of the damage, even on a spiritual level, so the question becomes even stronger. Why doesn't the pasuk explicitly say how much is involved to atone for it? The diaphragm and the 2 kidneys also. So on that, Rashi has to bring now the analogy, and he has to also say who said it, Rabbi Shmuel, because there's a Mishnah in Negoyim that Rabbi Shmuel says, Rabbi Shmuel Eimer, B'nei Yisrael, Ani Kaparosan. The Mishnah over there is talking about Negoyim, afflictions that Jews have, and Rabbi Shmuel, but it's talking about a certain case, Taras, etc. But when Rabbi Shmuel speaks about the subject, he says immediately, may I be atonement, Ani Kaparosan, for the Jewish people. So the point that Rashi is saying over here is that even though we just said how severe and serious the condition is, the circumstances are when there's such a sin, nevertheless, even in such a case, and that's the Chidush, we don't elaborate more than we have to speak about the flaw. And that's why it's a Bishmol that we have to say his name this time, because he's the one that represents that concept. And he was a role model of that. Whenever he spoke about the Chesar and the Yid, he said, Ani Kaparosan, I should be an atonement. Which means that the same thing is with the Eibishter. It's not pshat that the Eibishter looks at us, that we did something wrong and now we're in trouble, the truth is, as long as we're missing something, he's also missing something. You know, it's like people, let's say they belong to Lubavitch, and they say, oh, the problem with Lubavitch is, the problem with this. Hello, it's your child. You speak of it like it's a stranger. No. When it comes to your friend, you don't elaborate on what's missing. And this is what the Rebbe that takes the lesson. Aida filnas niter hat libat zweiten. When we say that you have obviously soul, it's not pshat that you love another as a tuta dem zulas, that you're doing a favor to another. No, that's it. On im allein, it affects himself. Ubefrat calls man and nimmt taris dem zweiten Eden von Golus b'chole Pirushim. And especially if that person still finds himself in the negative circumstances, gefindt sich in Golus. You feel as if you yourself is in Golus. And the Rebbe brings a moiridike example to this, the famous pasuk in Shmois and Yisrael, where it says, "V'esa eschem al kanfi neshorim," where Hashem says that I will carry you on the wings of an eagle. Hashem compares himself to the eagle, and Rashi says over there that just like an eagle is not worried about people on top of him that are going to fly higher, he's worried about the hunter which is going to shoot arrow from the ground. So therefore, what does he do? He puts his children, the eagle puts his children on top of him. So mutiv yikonis hachetz bi v'loy bibni. The eagle says, I'd rather the arrow pierces me than my children. So this is an example that the Rebbe says that the Eibishter is saying he'd rather he carries the flaws than that it should be his children should be affected by it. Similar to what Rabbi Shmuel said, B'nei Yisrael ani kaparosam. So too over here, after we do say the fact that the status of the Beis HaMikdash was lowered, was affected, therefore it doesn't say HaKodesh over here. Nevertheless, because we now know that, we also have to reaffirm, restate, to make the conviction that even in such a case, we don't elaborate. We don't elaborate, and we don't speak of it. We say, you know what? I feel the pain. I have a flaw. Anyways, we have to stop over here, and there's still more to talk about. The idea of rabbis have to take responsibility. You have to realize, leaders, if you're a father, if you're a teacher, you have to realize the responsibility that you have. Whatever you're doing, your people are looking at you, your followers, ones that you're responsible for. So you have to be extremely careful. At the same time, we learn out from this how all you're not connected. We're all connected somehow. The leader with his congregation and congregation with the leader, we're all in this together. And finally, even if we talk about a situation, which can be the most severe situations, we have to always look at a situation and say, no one's really better than anyone else. We're all in this together. And as long as there's one Yid that doesn't feel himself part of Klal Yisrael, then I am lacking. I'm missing. It's not that he has a problem. I have a problem. And I have to look inside myself to find inside myself how I can improve this problem and be better. And I have to pray and do whatever I can to help the other person to bring him to a better place. Mazel tov for the Rebbe's birthday. Im Yirtzeh Hashem, hopefully we'll speak again before Pesach. Good Shabbos. Posting from my home, Be'ez Hashem Yisborech, your man in Melbourne.